Merci à tous les deux.
Thank you very much to you both, and thank you to the experts for coming along. Mr. Van Ypersele's on his way as well.
Donc sans plus tarder, je vais ouvrir.
So without further ado, I'd like to open the debate. I don't intend to make a lengthy speech. It says here that I should introduce the topic. All I want to do really is stress that the European Economic and Social Committee is always concerned by climate change issues. My predecessor, Stefan Nielsen, made climate change and sustainable development one of the key issues during his term of office. The committee's done a lot of work on this, and we're all concerned. Whether we talk about it or not, climate change is actually happening. And Commissioner, Vice President, we've just adopted a declaration on the flooding in the Balkans. And there are links between climate change and these natural disasters that are happening again and again in Europe and around the world. And I think the institutions need to show some responsibility. Bodies such as ours, we need to, look at the long-term future and not be guided by short-term political issues. Climate change is one of the key issues for the future. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor first to Commissioner Oettinger, and then to Mr. Van Ypersele, and then I'll give the floor to the four rapporteurs on the committee opinions that fit in with this debate. So let me give the floor without further ado to Commissioner Oettinger.
Verehrter
Mr. President, Vice Presidents, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind invitation. Allow me to start by saying, with all due respect, that your cooperation, your recommendations and drafts for opinions that you can produce dealing with the energy sector in general prove very useful to us for our Commission proposals and communications. They are very valuable to us. They provide us with a good understanding of what the expectations are from European working world and the European economy. So I'm very keen on your cooperation, and I'm very interested in working together with you, together with my General Directorate over the next month's time, and together with my cabinet as well. Perhaps, in line with the agreed agenda, there are four subjects that I would like to address. First of all, there is not a single sector that has such long-term perspectives as the energy sector. Investments in energy, energy research, energy production, power plants, the transport of energy, the storage of energy, energy efficiency. All of these require security of planning that spans over many years. An essential part of our energy and climate change policy being the 2020 objectives. However, for investors who are out there in the energy sector, 2020 was yesterday. 2030 is tomorrow morning. And that's why in January we had our communication for energy and climate protection strategy, and we expect that in October the European Council will be able to present a thorough set of proposals that they can decide upon, based upon which we as legislators can look forward to adoption in the new Parliament and the Council at the latest in the first half of 2015. One focal point will be the 40% greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Some people say that's not ambitious enough. Others tell us that's too much. We rely on your feedback. What do you make of that figure, 40%? We would like to introduce greater flexibility, further expanding our renewable energy component in the energy mix, and our objective target is 27%. That is what we refer to as a figure in our communication. Currently, my general director and yours truly are working on a proposal dealing with energy efficiency. As you know, the Energy Efficiency Directive only entered into force in December of 2012, and in the member states it needed to be implemented, and this implementation phase and the national action plans are currently being reported on to us. And before the summer recess, we would like to come forward with a proposal as to how we can shape our energy efficiency strategy for the next decade. The reform of our emissions trading scheme, our ETS system, should be seen as a parallel part of the 2030 package. Secondly, together with you, we would like to take further steps to complete the internal market. Steps have been made forward, but there are some backward steps that we can report on in the autumn. And in the autumn, we'll come forward with a comprehensive communication based on external expertise as to how we can ensure that the full costs can be covered in the energy sector. What we make of subsidies, how high subsidies can represent from nuclear all the way through to solar and wind energy, thus having a transparent picture of the true full costs. And we can then proceed to create fair competition with fewer and fewer subsidies on the future energy market. Thirdly, following the request of the European Council last week, we have passed a communication on the subject of high energy supply security and reducing our dependence on imports. And then another point, Ukraine, Russia. The crisis between Ukraine and Russia and the European Union and the G7, well, for 2 days, the G7 is meeting here in Brussels, as indeed you are, and not the G8, because the measures taken by the Russian Federation that are contrary to international law, having a great deal to do with the civil war in Ukraine, this has disrupted our overall relationship with Russia. Russia was and still is our most important supplier for coal, for oil, uranium, and natural gas. Russia will be an increasingly important factor in the electricity sector. Therefore, we are currently considering a number of potential scenarios as to how we can reduce our dependence and not to turn that into being vulnerable to blackmail. We want to have a consistent understanding with a common position in Europe. We don't want to be played against one another by Putin. It's not so much about coal or oil, because we have a smoothly operating world markets for both coal and oil. But when it comes to crises such as Libya and others, the oil ban, when it comes to Iraq, or the war in Iraq, or Kuwait, energy security has always been maintained for oil. If there is sufficient competition, if there are enough players on the market and enough transport routes, we have the perfect diversification strategy situation. The Achilles heel is natural gas. In the 28 member states, there are 4 that do not get any natural gas from Russia: Ireland, the UK, Portugal, and Spain. We have 18 member states that get 10% and 80% of their remaining need comes from Gazprom in Russia. But then there's a second or third supplier as well: Norway, Algeria, or through maritime passes you get the Qatar, Algeria, Libya, soon Canada or Australia or the United States. And we have countries that have their own gas production: the Netherlands, the UK, Denmark. But we have 6 member states with a single source, a single supplier, a single transport route: 100% Gazprom: Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, Bulgaria, Slovakia. In other words, it is those member states particularly, they must be integrated in the internal market with a second source, a second transport route, a second supplier, in order to reduce their dependence. And that is very much part of our strategy, that in the short term, before next winter, and in the long term, for the years ahead, we're preparing for. Clearly, the Ukraine-Russia crisis is also a natural gas crisis. There are many bilateral and trilateral negotiations currently underway. What is important is to avoid any escalation on the natural gas sector, because on the one hand, we're talking about gas supplies for the Ukrainians themselves. As a partner country, that is important. And secondly, we're concerned with Ukraine as a transit country, because more than 50% of Gazprom's gas passes through Ukraine into the countries of the European Union. So those are my few words of introduction. Once again, we fully respect your texts, your resolutions, that we very much appreciate. And if you have any questions or points of criticism, I'll be looking forward to hearing them in the next 30, 40 minutes. Thank you for the invitation.
Je passe maintenant la parole à Monsieur.
I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Van Ypersele. If you could keep it fairly brief, because the Commissioner will have to leave. And then I'll ask the 4 rapporteurs to keep it as brief as possible. And then various people have also asked for the floor. And we need to leave some time for the response from the Commission. Obviously, he can only stay with us a certain length of time, and I'm sure he'll let me know when he has to go, and then we'll give him the floor. So if you could keep it to 10 minutes, please, I'd be grateful. Thank you very much, President. I'll try and keep it brief. I was told only 10 minutes ago that I had 10 minutes, and I'd been under the apprehension that I had 20 minutes. Now, I do have a presentation, PowerPoint presentation. I'll have to keep some parts of it brief. Now, I've been asked to talk about energy and climate change as the Vice President of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I'll limit myself to the key messages, the key elements to come from the IPCC report, its first 3 volumes. First point, is the climate warming up? Now, if we look at this curve, you might wonder if indeed the temperature is actually going up. We're talking about over the last 15 years. Some people say that the climate is not warming up because over the last 15 years we've had this kind of curve, this kind of development. However, there have been a number of trends along those lines over the last century, and this is what you might call cherry picking. showing just short periods and then making great conclusions about the planet. But the trend is clear. It is warming up about 1 degree since the beginning of the industrial period. And of course, the example that I've just shown and that you're familiar with shows that there have always been debates, controversies around climate issues. And that's why the United Nations set up the IPCC about 25 years ago, in order to look at this whole issue and provide political decision makers with the most precise information available on climate issues. And every 5 or 6 years, the IPCC comes up with a report. The last one deals with these 3 issues, basically, in general terms. What's happening in the climate system, what are the risks, and what can be done? There are hundreds of contributors, authors who've been involved in this. Tens of thousands of comments have been taken into account one by one in the work, which extends over a number of years. It's very thorough work. So what's happening then? Temperatures going up, sea levels are rising, glaciers shrinking. Look at this one in 1961 and how it is now in 2003, and it's the same angle. And that's what's happening with most glaciers in the world. Now, why then is this happening? Well, we all know very well it's because the concentration of carbon dioxide, which is released during combustion of fossil fuels, has gone up by 40% since the beginning of the industrial period, reaching levels which have never been seen in the last many millions of years. Over time, the gap between the blue line and the red line is growing. The blue line is a kind of simulation of the temperature observed. That's the blue, the black one, sorry. The red one takes into account natural factors, and you can see very clearly, looking at these very different levels, that you wouldn't be able to do anything without the CO2 here. That's what's happening. We're going to have to continue working on the basis of scenarios. You can see the 4 main ones here taken into account by the IPCC in order to make predictions about the future. The stabilization at the bottom, and then the business as usual is what happens if we do nothing. Business as usual. Now, the 2 extremes here, only the bottom one, the stable one, will allow us to stay at about 2, with a 66% probability below the major increase of 2%. There's a great difference at the end of the century. If you look at this, between the result of the worst and best case scenarios, there's a very clear message that emerges here from the first report. Cumulative emissions, total emissions, CO2, which affect the development of the temperature. So you can have a look at this, the various axes. Basically, if you look at this, there's a total quantity of carbon here that you can burn in air, and that's about 800 billion tons, where we've done more than 60% of that, burnt more than 60% of that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So we've got very little room for manoeuvre if we want to stay below an increase of 2 degrees. And it's only the lowest scenario that will allow us to keep below that temperature increase. If you look at the blue curve, it gets to 0 by the end of the century. If we want to stay below the +2 degrees, we need 0 or below in order to achieve that objective. So it's a far more ambitious objective than many politicians appear to have understood. What are the risks then? I'll race through this so that we can get onto the solutions phase. 2 pictures really to show you what kind of risk we are dealing with. That's the situation 20,000 years ago on Earth. 3 kilometers of ice in Northern Europe and North America, far lower sea levels, because there was so much water in the glaciers. Now this is where we are today. 4 to 5 degrees warmer, that's the only difference Those are gigantic, enormous changes in terms of where you can live, what parts of the planet are inhabitable. Let me race through the rest of the slides, because if not, I won't have enough time. And I do want to spend time talking about what can be done, and that ties in with energy. The emissions are going up faster and faster. The rate of growth over the last 10 years is 2.2% more per year for CO2, and that's more than was the case in the 30 years before. We're talking about an increase in fossil fuels, coal in emerging economies. I think you all know what the breakdown is between the different sources of energy. More than 3/4 of world energy comes today from fossil fuels. And in spite of all that, the IPCC feels that on the basis of scientific literature that it is possible to remain below the 2-degree temperature increase, maybe even 1.5. But that will mean that we need to make rapid improvements in the area of energy efficiency. We need a near quadrupling of the share of low-carbon energy by 2050. I'm talking about renewables, nuclear, fossil and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, CCS. And if our objective is 1.5 degrees, then obviously we'd have to move more quickly. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is a technique which isn't yet ready. It's not mature. So there are a whole range of challenges and risks associated with that technology, including large-scale provision of the necessary biomass to implement these technologies. Now, the lowest scenario in its implementation, that's on the right in blue on this transparency here, that shows a very significant increase of the share of low-carbon energy sources in total energy provision at world level, up to 80% by the end of the century. Important changes would be needed in terms of investment flows, less investment in fossil fuels, and on the other hand, in a great deal of investment in OECD and non-OECD countries when it comes to low carbon and renewable energies. A whole raft of policies have been assessed in Volume 3 of the IPCC report dealing with prevention, combating GHG emissions, having a regulatory approach, for example, having permit exchange systems, tax-based systems. There's emphasis placed on the importance of international cooperation. International taxes can only be introduced if there's an international agreement. So the 2015 Paris conference will be very important. Key messages from the last report then: the more we wait, given that we're talking about a total carbon budget that has to be limited if we want to stay under the +2 degree temperature increase or 1.5. Because of all that, the more we wait to reverse this trend, the more difficult it will be. The more we wait, the more ambitious things will be, the more sizable the reductions would have to be. Now, I'm rounding off. I'm trying to keep to the 10 minutes. Mitigation can result in achieving a lot of objectives, reducing air pollution. That's good for health, human health. But as the Commissioner was just saying, it's important in terms of energy security. If we have energy efficiency going up, if we have to produce or import or process less energy, then there are certain benefits. So cooperation between all countries, all sectors, all stakeholders is absolutely crucial in this area. And I'll round off on that note. Thank you.
Félicitations. Merci aussi d'être resté surtout pour des.
Thank you very much for that. The speaker interrupts. I'll be providing a summary of the IPCC's 3-volume report to the Commissioner. I'll hand that over to him now. And there's also a summary that will be presented by the IPCC in October. It gives an across-the-board vision of what's going on, meaning that you have a single document where you can get all the key information. The President. Before handing the floor to those colleagues who have asked to speak, I'd like to offer the chance to the rapporteurs to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes or less. Otherwise, Commissioner Oettinger will not have the chance to answer any questions that you or the other colleagues may have. I'm sorry about this, but there's no other option. And I would point out that in the European Parliament it's only 2 minutes, so here you're getting a full extra minute. Let's start then with Ms. Serkanen. That's the order I have on my piece of paper in front of me. It's report NAT 636. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll speak Finnish, so please put your headsets on. Now, my life today has been made easier by Commissioner Oettinger, because he said why we need these proposals that the Commission has included in its communication, and those are the things that we deal with in this opinion. Now, the basic issue is here that we need a lot of investment in energy and climate, long-term investment. It's what we need for the future, and that's why we need clarity when it comes to the future policies to be pursued. And 2030 is, of course, just round the corner. Now, the challenges that we have before us are extremely serious in nature, and Mr. Ypersele's presentation made that point abundantly clear. I don't think there's anything that needs to be added to that, and we've got to try and find ways of meeting those challenges. And obviously we're in it for the long run here. It's a long-term commitment. We have to look at the achievements of climate policy hitherto, and also we need to look at other societal objectives that we have set ourselves concerning economic issues, competitiveness, social issues, and another very topical issue, the whole issue of ensuring security of energy supply. In one way or another, those objectives have to be combined in a series of measures in order to allow us to achieve our objectives without obviously harming our objectives in other areas too. And it's very difficult to come up with a clear idea as to how you can combine all these various objectives and take them into account simultaneously. Now, according to our opinion, the Commission has done a very good job, actually, of taking these things into account. There are so many different considerations, and obviously there are very many opinions on these issues, and obviously it depends on people's really basic position. Are you someone who's involved in a business working with these? Are you someone who has to bear the costs of all this? Or do you suffer in some other way from this situation? But I think actually the Commission has done a good job of finding a balance, and we support the basic thrust of the proposal here, 40% reduction of GHG emissions by 2030. This is a very ambitious target. And this 2-degree target could be achieved with a 35% reduction, and an awful lot has been done already, and we certainly support that. And then there's the 27% target for the share of renewable energy across the EU, and combined EU target. We don't support carving that up between the member states, because we've got to try and do this in a cost-efficient manner. and we've got to try and come up with a common energy policy and a common energy market, and that's something that the Commission has been pushing for. If we set national targets, if we force people to achieve certain levels of share of renewable energy, then that would call into question the other targets. Energy efficiency, that's something that will be coming back later, and we could think about sectoral proposals. That's something that we'll come back to during the summer. The Commission has also suggested a new governance model, according to which the Member States would come up with their own programmes, and this we warmly support. Furthermore, we've talked about the issue of security of supply. That's something that the Commission very clearly set out. There's the situation of energy-intensive industries that has to be taken into account. We need to invest more and more radically. And finally, the most important issue of all is that we achieve an international agreement in Paris, because the EU alone is not going to be able to solve this problem on its own. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor to José Borrell and ask him to please stick to the 3-minute limit. I'd be very grateful.
Děkuji, pane předsedo. Já bych se věnoval.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to speak about shale gas as a new source available in the European territory. Given the current geopolitical situation, shale gas is an extremely important opportunity, particularly in those member states which are not very rich otherwise in primary energy sources. Although the estimate is that shale gas could cover only about 10% of the European consumption, the exploration and extraction of shale gas would be extremely strategically important because it would have impact on the gas diplomacy that we are currently witnessing in the European Union. In order to speed up the relevant processes, the Commission has issued a communication and a recommendation for those member states where this source is available to start exploring. What is important, what is key for acceptance of this source by the public is the transparency of the exploration and extraction works. We believe that the present framework, if adequately applied, sufficiently covers the needs at the different local communities level, and therefore we do not need a new directive on this right now. Relatively reliable fossil fuel energy is still necessary to have to balance off the unstable renewable sources of energy in the grid and to strengthen the security of supply. Technology is advancing. The drills are not suffering from any leaks into the surrounding minerals nor to the surface. So leaks have been minimized. Also, the emergency combustion in the gas burners is kept to a minimum. The acceptance of non-conventional sources such as hydrogen is also necessary so that part of the income from all these activities goes into the budgets of the affected local communities in a transparent manner. Therefore, we recommend to accept the procedure suggested by the Commission in the form of a recommendation and in the given time frame, and to monitor the application and the transparency of all the processes, adherence to the current legal norms, environmental care, and adherence to legitimate public expectations. After this is all assessed, we can come up with further suggestions and evaluate the need to adopt any legislative acts on fracking in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having stuck to the time limit. I'd now like to hand the floor to Antonello Pedini, who will be even briefer, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll do my best. This is a proposal for a decision submitted to us by the Commission given the very, very intensive work they've been involved in. And let me state, representing Italian industry, how appreciative we are of the Commissioners for Energy's efforts and compensating for these imbalances that have now existed on the quotas and on the ETS market, the emissions trading system, looking over the past 3 years, because of the combined effect of two factors: the energy crisis, which has reduced the need for energy, primary energy, and final energy for companies and citizens. And secondly, the fact that the development of renewables has created an alternative market, creating a crisis for traditional energy producers who were the major beneficiaries of the ETS quotas. There's a need to maintain the principle of the trading scheme. Well, the Commission, in making this proposal, together with the other proposals we are currently discussing, suggests that we shift a quota for stabilization purpose for 2021, so that the ETS prices can go up. And we can also auction off the quotas between now and 2021. That's a very well thought through proposal, and we welcome that in the Economic and Social Committee, not just in the study group, but in this section. My colleagues very much appreciate the ETS scheme idea, which will allow us to move towards a reduction in CO2, looking at the 12,000 companies in Europe and the 200 in Italy that are emitting high levels of CO2, so that they can reduce, we can raise awareness and have the supervision, all moving towards a low-carbon economy with all of the benefits that have been indicated.
Well, there you have it. Shorter, briefer again. I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Adams.
As we know, energy is life. Yes, there's more to life than just energy, but without energy, there's no life. And you could also argue that with too much energy, there will also be no life. We're faced with several energy-related problems, the cost of energy being just one of them, but a very important one. And the main conclusion of this opinion and of the Commission is that the only way we can solve them is by doing it together. In our democracies, the consumer, as citizen and voter, has the power to support governments or to change them. And in nearly every country, energy is an issue of great public unease and of political sensitivity. It presses the three buttons of economic, social and environmental concern. In practical terms, there are at least 30 million households who are having difficulty right now paying their energy bills across Europe. But there are lots of conflicts to be resolved, trade-offs to be made. We know, for example, that ensuring secure gas supplies or reliability of electricity supply, access for all and affordability for those in energy poverty all involve significant cost implications. Similarly, the transition to a low-carbon energy system will mean extra short and medium-term costs. Energy is not going to get cheaper, whatever politicians do. Consumers won't like this. They are also citizens and voters. If we are to use the power of our vote responsibly, we need a clear understanding of the parameters of energy policy. We need to be able to understand those full costs that the Commissioner has talked about and the implications that we heard for climate change. We're at the beginning of a major energy transition which will take place during this century. Most people are not aware of this. Most countries do not have a proper framework in place for citizens to be engaged, to be really informed, and as a union, we do not have an effective governance system in place to ensure our targets are met and we all pull together. There are many things that we can do together. A sensible agreement about the role of shale gas, CCS and nuclear, for example, in providing a stepping stone to secure continuous energy from renewables. Agreement on investment priorities, the urgent need to improve energy efficiency, improving the internal energy market. If we can raise the level of debate and understanding amongst the general public, it will give policymakers greater confidence in making those long-term decisions This is lacking at present, and at the same time, it will show consumers that they can creatively play their own part, because consumers have to be involved in this new energy world. If we pull together on this vital issue, we will prove that we have a Europe that can deliver not only on affordable and secure supply, but on the vital transition to a low-carbon society. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je voulais passer la parole à Edgardo, mais je vais d'abord passer la parole au...
Right, thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the president of the 10 section first. 2 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Commissioner. A few months ago, you asked for an exploratory opinion on European dialogue on energy so that citizens would be able to participate in European thinking on energy. I think this is an essential step because whether we like it or not, our societies are based on energy. We communicate thanks to energy. We heat our homes, we travel, etc. thanks to energy. In the 2030 Energy Climate Framework, member states have on several occasions posed questions about the governance of energy. How are we going to monitor the policies we decide on? How are we going to implement them? And I think this is an important point. It could be very useful for civil society to be offered the opportunity to make a contribution on these topics in which they are directly involved. After all, it is people, the public, who have to live, heat their homes, pay their electricity bills. And it's important, therefore, that real people be involved, that we break out of the political bubble and include their thoughts. I think it would be extremely useful if the Commission, therefore, could send us another request for an exploratory opinion on that topic. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second has to do with the presentation by Mr. van Ypersele. I have a couple of doubts. I have a couple of doubts about how experts communicate on the work of the IPCC. In 2007, we were told that the glaciers at the top of the Himalaya were going to disappear very quickly. Then, a few years later, we were told it was a miscalculation. Then, in 2010, a number of French scientists asked the Minister of Research and Higher Education to speak out in favour of the opinions of some scientists against another group of scientists, almost as if the state was meant to be verifying the science. I think all of this is extremely unfortunate. It's the wrong way of looking at science, if you will permit me to say so. And without wishing to be alarmist, it almost seems like the little boy who cried wolf. If you cry wolf too often, after all, nobody will believe you at the end of the day. Thank you very much. Mr. Slavovac, the president of the NAT section, and then Eduardo Josea. Diliana.
Thank you very much. Dear Commissioner, it's a pleasure to meet you here and to see your positive attitude towards the work of the European Economic and Social Committee. Today, energy is the major problem of the European Union, and in future we must aim to make more use of its own low-carbon energy resources. The discussion on 2030 EU climate and energy framework showed the need to clarify and substantiate the new governance mechanisms proposed by the European Commission, given its prime importance for the success of the whole scheme. The European Economic and Social Committee highly welcome and request from you, dear Commissioner, to elaborate an exploratory opinion on the subject. We rely very much on it. Also, we know that the European Commission, in your face, is in favour of a new European energy security strategy. And I have two questions here. When the European Union will be energy less dependent, or could we talk of independence, perhaps our grandchildren? And my second question, is it time for the energy union today, where we could achieve strong and sustainable partnerships with suppliers and avoid falling victims to political or commercial blackmail? Thank you very much.
Merci, Diliana.
Thank you, Iliana. Colleagues, if you could take 1 or 2 minutes each so that everybody gets a chance to speak and we give the Commissioner some time to reply. I'll come back to my list here. Mr. Pinter. He's down on the list. I have a question for the Commissioner. Time is short, so I'll put a quick question to you. The largest company in Austria and the three largest companies next year are going to be expanding a factory in Texas. Originally, the plans were to have this in Europe, but it turns out that the costs for the same capacity would be, on an annual basis, 18 million euros more expensive compared to the United States. Over a period of 5 years, a decision will be taken as to where these installations will be, in Europe or not. This is yet another specific case in point, showing us that Europe has a big problem on its hands. On the one hand, we have our climate change policy, our environmental policy, and then our economic interests. We need a quick solution because already today we are not in a position to face the competition with Russia, China, and others. Particularly in the documents, there's a reference to the fact that last year we need a strong, solid economic basis upon which we can build jobs, failing which in Europe we will not be producing for much longer. We will not be able to, and these jobs will be lost. Far more products will be imported than that we need for our economies. Often the type of technology that we make use of from abroad, and very often producing even more CO2 than would be the case if produced in Europe. That is an unacceptable and unbearable situation that would continue. There are many concerns, but my straightforward question to you is, what would you like to initiate and what message would you send to the new Commission?
Merci, Président. On m'avait dit 5, c'est 2.
Well, we said 5 is 2. Well, Commissioner, you've got quite a bit of work, but you're off to a good start, but there's a lot that hasn't been done yet. I heard you speak in Athens, and some wise words were spoken there, because you condemned those states that point accusing fingers at others for their behavior, but asking them to do what they don't do back at home. And almost half of the states with representatives in this room have not yet done their national plan for energy efficiency. And of course, there's no point in going to Alexei Miller in Gazprom on the sidelines and negotiate in secret with him, with a state company, a state-run company, or talking directly to Mr. Putin. When the day comes that this Europe of ours has genuine solidarity in the energy sector, things will look a lot better. Because today, it is a rather messy situation. 3 years ago already, we called for a European Energy Committee. Today, Poland is suggesting an energy union. 3 years ago, we had already proposed the establishment of grouped gas purchases. Poland thinks that this should be acted upon. Some member states and some members of the Commission, in the name of this holy principle of free competition without limits, well, let's carry on that way, shall we? We're heading for disaster. We're heading for disaster all the more so because, as Chairman Buffetot said a few minutes ago, the dialogue with civil society has not been initiated, no more than with our friends in the IPCC. They listen to the major groups every now and then within the United Nations organizations and the major groups within which you have a number of professional NGOs in the debate who are not dealing with daily realities, or a handful of trade union organizations with headquarters in New York that don't deal with daily issues. Friends, let's pull up our socks and start showing some genuine solidarity for a European community for energy.
OK. Je demande aux collègues d'être extrêmement rapides.
I'll ask colleagues to be very quick because the Commissioner does have to leave. So Lutz Riba, Mr. van Oorschot, André Mordaunt, Edgardo Iozza, and Thierry Libert could each put one question in 1 minute's time. The Commissioner will have the time to respond. If you take more than a minute, he won't be able to respond. Sorry, but that's the way it is. No choice. Lutz, 1 minute. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Oettinger, the times they are changing. Mr. Barroso said, well, between 80 and 90% CO2 reduction is the target by 2050. And you referred to a new industrial revolution. It's true. When the founding fathers of this European Union were active, they created the European Community for Coal and Steel. Nobody talked about dependence on resources or the climate or any of that. Today, the scientists are warning us, the thousands of the IPCC panel are warning us, and I'm grateful that the Commission now has an energy and climate package, both going hand in hand. The climate and the challenges of coping with the energy needs of the future, reducing our import dependence, not only is an invitation to diversify, but to reduce our import dependency. Bringing the two together, I think the responses should be clear: saving energy, energy efficiency, and renewable energies. I'm truly grateful for the very clear message that you had. We don't want to be subjected to blackmail. We don't want any part of Mr. Putin's games. Actually, the players should be with the civil society. Not only are we looking at technological type changes, but also structural changes and challenges in energy production. And all I can say is that we're currently working on a study in the European Economic and Social Committee dealing with the issue: how will civil society be involved in the implementation of these objectives? I'm sorry, I have to hand over to Frank van Oorschot. Just one question, please. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to say the following thing. From agriculture and horticulture, that's my sector. It's a very important key to the solution for the entire environmental and climate problem, and also for the energy problem. When we're talking about the climate, in the Netherlands, a study was published by the Ministry for Agriculture and Horticulture that is full of potential solutions and ways to achieve goals. But when it comes to energy, I would ask Mr. Oettinger, agriculture and horticulture can play a very important role in its role in the economy. There are all kinds of projects being worked on. There's a conference, the World Bioenergy Forum in Sweden, currently working with the support from the Commission to produce such initiatives. For the future, we need to ensure a proper climate for investments, particularly in agriculture and horticulture, and looking at the regional energy chains. Thank you.
Merci. André Mordaunt.
André Mordaunt, thank you, President. 2 points. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. Van Ypersele for the quick-fire presentation, and thank you for taking into account competitiveness, and for saying that there could be a huge cost if we're not careful, and competitiveness could bear the brunt of that. And then, of course, there are demographic consequences, energy supply, freshwater access. All these things could be called into question. I think that's the reason why the IPCC needs to continue to tell us what it's observing, and it does so via the reports it produces. Mr. Oettinger, we found gas in Cyprus. Does the EU intend to work with Cyprus to try and bring gas to mainland Europe via the Mediterranean. Mr. Iozia.
Buongiorno, Commissario.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. 3 questions, very quick. You're in charge as the guardian of the treaties. I ask you, firstly, why is it that the Lisbon Treaty, Article 194, has not been applied? It's practically remained a dead letter. Why have we not achieved an internal market? Why are we still just looking on at the effects of a lack of integration on the energy market? Why do we not yet have a common energy policy? We talked about the European community of energy. In Europe, the cost of supply, the cost of energy being a huge factor in development for companies. They will be leaving us if they don't have a clear answer from Europe on that question. I know you're very keen on those questions. I'd like a reply. Thank you.
Thierry Libert.
Mr. Libert, last but not least. Now, in the preparatory work on the report that will be published at the end of October, the IPCC says that even if we stop emissions here and now, then we will still have climate problems for the next century. Now, we could be optimistic, perhaps after what Mr. Barroso and Obama said on Monday, but even so, the economic crisis seems to be stopping us from acting. Any measure to fight climate change will penalise the economy and thus employment. We always say that other people are selfish and do nothing, and that gives us a justification for doing very little. And we talk about adaptation rather than climate change and fighting it as if we accept that it's inevitable now. Now, I do have a question for Mr. Van Ypersele. Now, we're in this time of economic crisis. We represent companies, civil society. What can we do so that Europe can become an example to the rest of the world and shoulder all its responsibilities here? Thank you.
Commissaire, je passe la parole.
Commissioner, you have the floor.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, you have many, many questions. When I took over my responsibilities 4.5 years ago, European energy policy was a new area of competence for us. And it was only active, if at all, in the area of climate change. And it must remain very closely linked to climate change, but it must also take into account industry and the economy. Energy policy must tread a balance between industry policy, employment policy, and climate policy. And as a third area of importance is the social side of things, the payability of energy. Energy policy for me, number 1, must serve the environment. Number 2, it must ensure jobs in industry. And number 3, it must be payable for European citizens, and that includes citizens with low incomes. These are the 3 objectives that set the foundation for our energy policy. Climate protection is an area where Europe continues to be a pioneer. But we have to remember that over the long term, European climate protection policy only makes sense if it is based on a global agreement. At this time, the European Union still is responsible for 10.6% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. But by 2030, we will only be responsible for 6 to 7% of those gases. That means that unless the USA, China, India and Brazil follow our lead, then it is not going to work. If they do follow our lead, and if we stick to our strong objectives, then we can make a change. But otherwise, if we are on our own, then we will not reach our objectives. Next year, there will be a major conference in Paris on this topic. It's going to be extremely important, just like Copenhagen was. The results of Copenhagen were disappointing. And the results from Paris must be far more encouraging, and they must come with an important commitment from industrial and emerging economies. a number of the speakers talked about industry policy, and they mentioned energy costs as part of that. I don't think that energy costs are any reason for industry to leave our shores. A company in Austria was mentioned in one of the examples. It involves top-end steel production. Now, if copper, steel, tin, aluminium, or chemicals industry, if these are industries that we want to keep in Europe, then we quite simply cannot continue to pay 3 or 4 times over the odds for our gas than what is paid in the USA. We are going to have a gas price strategy. We have to move away from oil indexation. We have to get more we need to get more competition into the system. We may need to have more shale gas. We only produce 1/3 of our gas consumption here in the European Union. And I think that it would be wrong to produce less at home and import more. And that's where shale gas could help shift the balance. Now, as regards electricity, there are 2 drivers to electricity prices. One is taxes, national taxes, and the other is partially a lack of cost efficiencies in the system for renewable energies. There are now solar power plants in Europe. Some of them are in suitable places, some of them are in less suitable places. In my home country, for example, Germany, Germany is only a country that is partially suitable for solar energy, but Spain, Italy, Greece would be far better locations for solar power, which means we have to Europeanize the incentive system for solar energy. It's something that must urgently be done now. Now, somebody talked about a common energy foreign policy. Now, here, we really have to have the member states rowing with us. In previous generations, for example, you used to have meetings between Mr. Putin and Mr. Chirac or Mr. Sarkozy, or then a meeting between him, Mr. Putin and Mr. Berlusconi, or between Mr. Putin and Mr. Schröder. They were all special relationships, and that is not something that marries well with a concerted European approach. What I'm trying to say is we need more European. We need a more European perspective. That's the only way that we are going to be able to protect our position vis-à-vis third-party countries that are important for our energy imports. On the member states that import gas from Russia via Ukraine received a letter in April from Mr. Putin. There were 13 member states who received the letter. The Commission didn't get the letter. We reacted immediately and said, Mr. Barroso sent a letter saying that we, the Commission, are partially responsible for this. And Putin was shocked, and we were quite pleased. We said that he should not be getting 13 responses and would not be getting 13 responses from 13 member states, but rather one response on behalf of everyone from us. That was sent by Mr. Barroso. And since then, we've been looking at issues of securing supply, solving the crisis between Ukraine and Russia, paying off the debts that the unpaid bills of Ukraine to Russia for energy. This has been a major breakthrough for a joint energy foreign policy vis-à-vis our most important energy partner country, Russia. It's a first breakthrough. Now, the same is needed in the internal market. Why do we still not have an internal market for energy? Well, I'd like to point out that we have more internal market now than ever before. We have more competition in the system. We have increasingly the possibility for individual electricity suppliers, for consumers to change supplier. We have stronger consumer protection policy, but we haven't yet reached our end destination. That's why we have to keep working. Infrastructure is a key factor in that. We have a list of projects of common interests. These were agreed on in October last year. There are 250 measures that have been set out. These include interconnectors, that is to say, electricity bridges over borders and beyond. We have to have more liquid natural gas terminals. These are all measures which will serve to improve the internal market. We have a complete oil market, internal market. You can get oil off of a ship and transport it by road or by pipeline across Europe. But if we want a perfect, and we have also a very good internal market for wine, for example. You can transport Bordeaux or Rioja across Europe perfectly, but we need that also for electricity, and that is going to require the development of the corresponding infrastructure projects of common interest. Now, in our budget, we have a line called Connecting Europe. It has a great deal of financing available, but we still have to carry all of this out, and it's very important. We think that energy efficiency and saving is of huge importance here. It must play a very important role. Soon we'll be making a new proposal to continue our energy efficiency strategy up to 2030. It will be a new proposal. It will have a number of measures in it about how much energy we can save between then and now. But you should be under no illusions. Energy requires first investment before you can ever reap the benefits. Whenever you build a school, whenever you build barracks or a private building in the private economy, if you were to start at the roof and come down, installing new energy efficiency materials, new windows, new insulation, if you were to install better boilers, smart meters, ICT controls, if you were to do all these smart controls, then per square meter it would probably cost you about €800. But at the end of the month, your power bill, your heating bill would little by little over 20 years pay off that investment. But it would take 20 years. That means that now mayors have to decide whether to make investments for the benefit of future counterparts. Let's look at individual property owners, householders. For example, in the city centre of Berlin, or in the English city of Birmingham, or in Sofia. If they're living in a home built in 1970, they could install a whole number of measures from the roof down to save energy and heating. And it would probably cost thousands and thousands of euros, 80,000 euros per house, perhaps. It would cost huge amounts of money. And perhaps they would only have 20,000 in their savings account, so they'd have to take out 60,000 in loans, just so that years later, whoever inherits the house will pay a lower electricity bill. Now, of course, the reaction is, I'd rather spend the 20,000 euros in my savings account, if I'm living in Birmingham, to go to Mallorca and have a really good holiday, rather than invest all that money and take out debt, just so that in years down the line, someone else can reap the benefits. It means that we have to have incentives in place so that whoever has a home has facilities available to encourage them to make these investments, to see that it makes sense. Now, there was a question about Cyprus. Now, in the east of the Mediterranean, there are huge deposits of gas belonging to Israel, Lebanon, Cyprus, Greece, and perhaps part of it also falls into Turkish waters. The problem is that not everyone recognises the borders. Cyprus is a known problem. In a few weeks' time in Malta, we'll be having a gas conference on gas deposits in the Eastern Mediterranean. We need optimal infrastructure. That means sea pipelines or LNG terminals. It involves a great deal of bureaucracy. However, if we could pipe the gas from Israel and Cyprus onto land in Turkey and from there into Europe, rather than a very expensive underwater pipeline from Cyprus up to Greece, then it would be far more feasible. We need to find another way, a more operational way to diversify our gas sector in the years to come. I'd like to thank you once again for your very engaging debates, and I look forward to your opinions and what they will contain. For my service and my department, they are of great importance. We will look at them with great detail and take them into account. I wish you all the very best with your plenary session today and tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And all the best to you in your continued work. I now give the floor to Jean-Pascal von Ypersele to answer the questions that were put to him. Over to you. Thank you, Chairman. I think the first question, the first comment, was about a mistake in the Himalayan glaciers. Mr. Buffetot raised that point. It's true, there was a mistake. On page 492, Mr. Buffetot has an excellent memory. That's in volume 2 of what added up to more than 1,000 pages, 3 volumes, 3,000 pages. There was an error, a typo involving 2 letters. It said the Himalayan glaciers should disappear in 2035. It should have been written 2050, so 2 figures. Do you know many 3,000-page documents that contain 0 errors? I couldn't answer that, but the glaciers I showed you are almost all receding. The most recent IPCC meeting shows that in the best scenario, it's about 1/3 of the volume of world glaciers melted. And in the highest case scenario, it's 1/2 of the total volume of glaciers melting. The error was recognized in the past rather quickly, and it was corrected entirely transparently, explaining it throughout. So to say, for that one reason, that the IPCC is alarmist, fairly exaggerated. I'm sure you'll agree. The IPCC looks at the impact measures based on the understanding, and that these opinions is agreed to by the massive majority of the competent authorities, those who seek consensus, recognizing that it is a good idea for there to be aspects relating to climate change where we don't have the consensus, which is something that the IPCC recognizes clearly in its report. I invite you to read the report in its entirety. Mr. Coulon raised a question as well, asking how did the IPCC discuss matters with the major groups? Well, that's not really the role of the IPCC to enter into discussions with any particular group. The mandate of the IPCC is to evaluate the scientific literature, the current state of knowledge and scientific understanding, and to the greatest possible extent to be useful for political decision makers without replacing them. The IPCC tries to be politically relevant without telling others what to do. It presents values and the pros and the cons of different techniques and scenarios, measures that can potentially be taken to reduce emissions, but without making those choices, without recommending which course should be embarked upon in policy. It presents the effects and no more. In its work, the IPCC calls upon the scientists of the entire world, the experts, wherever they come from industry, from civil society, to come forward with their comments. Hundreds upon hundreds of experts have voluntarily made their contributions and sent in their commentaries. You've seen the figures, more than 50,000 comments for each of the volumes of the last report, all of them taken on board by the authors of the IPCC. You couldn't imagine a more disciplined and transparent procedure in the history of scientific achievement and in the history of scientific literature, probably there is no example of that sort, even though that's not directly the mandate of the IPCC. But in our dialogue with the experts, through our work on their comments, is a very, very vast dialogue, far more than many people apparently believe. Looking at these comments and the answers to them, they become or will become available in their entirety at the IPCC summit. It's really quite difficult to be more complete or transparent. The conference on bioenergy to take place.
Sweden was mentioned by Mr. Van Oorschot. I was actually delivering the keynotes on behalf of IPCC to that conference in Sweden yesterday morning, and you mentioned agriculture, and indeed, as a speaker, I received a package of flour produced without any fossil fuel by a Swedish company, showing that it was indeed possible to exercise agriculture today without using fossil fuel. That is what that company was doing. We also saw examples of airplanes flown on biofuel, so there is a lot of progress made in that area. Enfin, il y avait une...
And finally, another question, I think this is the last one, from Mr. Liebert, who pointed out that there was nothing being done on climate change, and I think that's quite true. We have the accumulated effect of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and it is the result of this accumulation that is driving this climate change that we're only starting to witness. So inevitably, we're not seeing enough happening because this layer of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, even if we were to stop things, stop our emissions or seriously reduce them, that layer isn't going to disappear overnight. It will remain with us for quite some time. Even if we substantially reduce these substances, the climate change would remain visible. So against a backdrop of a general economic crisis, a very more significant priority in many countries compared to environmental protection or climate protection, what points of the IPCC report are the most promising in providing answers to that dilemma? Given the opportunities out there in preventing climate change and adapting to climate change, there are a number of opportunities to be seized in two policy areas that will generate benefits or spin-offs in other areas. For example, reducing air pollution, which can be obtained if we can properly design a reduction of greenhouse gases in the field of transport, for example. Reducing air pollution can have an important benefit in improving public health, for example. Another positive spin-off. More spin-off potentially when it comes to energy security. Do we know, to the extent that we should, that the European Union depends on 400 billion euros annually on imported fossil fuels, coal, petrol, oil, coming from outside of the EU? Clearly, if energy efficiency and the demand for energy were to be improved significantly, we're talking about pretty impressive figures. Of course, you need to have the long-term vision, including the investments, as others have pointed out amongst the rapporteurs, to reap the benefit. But you could make use of this money for other purposes rather than just buying fossil fuels from other parts of the world. That too is in the IPCC report in Group 3. They talk about the potential for job creation in the field of renewables, for example. There are also evaluation studies of the costs, the accumulated costs of policies worldwide that could help protect the climate, expressed in terms of reduced world economic growth. The costs are very low, actually, between 0.04 and 0.14%. of average reduction of growth, whereas natural growth would be over the century based on the model between 1.6 and 3%. So this is just a small share of that cost, a very small component that would be used for protecting the climate and maintaining a livable planet. We wonder whether these costs would be so low. We're talking, after all, about making the only planet we have available to live on livable for the present and future generations. So to sum up, there are quite a number of compelling reasons besides climate repercussions to have a policy of reducing greenhouse gases. A whole series of real opportunities in other areas, not just limited to climate change, that could be the result. That's one of the key messages of the most recent IPCC report. Chairman, those are a few additional comments I wanted to make.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Vice-président.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Rapporteur, and thank you to all colleagues who participated in the debate, particularly for respecting the limited speaking time. We must adapt. We needed enough time for the Commissioner and Mr. Ypersele to give you answers, and we need the time to listen to what they have to say. So thank you very much. I hand over to Vice President Mayo